welcome back to our cozy forest adventures. Join our forest friends as they embark on a brand new journey through the woods, discovering surprises, friendship, and tiny magical moments along the way. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming forest tales. Sweet dreams and happy listening. Stories from the woods, paper boats on the river. The river was moving slow that morning. The sun touched the water, turning it into a path of gold and silver, and the air carried a soft smell of damp earth and fresh grass. Hazel the bunny sat at the bank, her paws tucked under her as she watched little ripples slide by. She liked mornings like this, quiet with only the chatter of birds in the trees and the gentle swish of water against the reeds. Pip the squirrel came bouncing down the path, a folded piece of paper clutched in his paws. His tail bobbed behind him like a banner. "Hazel!" he called, skidding to a stop beside her. "Look, I've made something." Hazel blinked and tilted her head. "What is it?" Pip grinned and opened his paws. A small, neatly folded boat sat there, the edges sharp, the folds tight. "A boat," he said proudly. "For racing." Hazel's ears twitched. "On the river?" "Yes. The water's just right today. Not too fast, not too slow. Perfect for sailing." Pip set the little boat gently on the surface, and it wobbled, then steadied, carried forward by the current. Hazel leaned closer, her nose twitching as she followed its path. "It works," she whispered, a little amazed. "Of course it works," Pip puffed out his chest. "I practiced all night." From behind them came a low voice, steady and kind. "Practiced all night for what?" Brindle the badger stepped out of the trees, carrying a basket filled with smooth stones. He placed the basket on the grass and leaned on it, watching the boat drift away. "For racing boats," Pip said quickly. "Do you want to try?" Brindle raised a brow. "I've never made a paper boat before," Hazel smiled. "It's easy." "Pip can show us." So the three of them sat in the grass together. Pip flattened a scrap of paper and guided their paws, folding corner to corner, tucking edges, pressing the lines. Hazel's tongue stuck out a little as she tried to keep her folds neat, while Brindle's big paws made clumsy creases, but he didn't mind. By the time they were done, 3 little boats sat in the grass. Pip's sharp and tidy, Hazel's a little uneven, and Brindle's, well, lopsided, but still floating. "Perfect," Pip said, though he giggled when Brindle's leaned to one side. They carried their boats to the edge of the river. The water lapped softly against the bank, carrying tiny leaves downstream. The sun was climbing higher, warm on their backs, and the air was full of buzzing insects and bird song. "Ready?" Pip asked, his eyes sparkling. "Ready," Hazel said. "As ready as I'll ever be," Brindle muttered, though there was a small smile on his face. Together they set their boats gently on the water. The current caught them, tugging them forward, and soon 3 boats drifted side by side, bobbing along the golden path of sunlight. Pip cheered, clapping his paws. Hazel leaned forward eagerly, and even Brindle's eyes lit up as he watched. At first, Pip's boat surged ahead, straight and sure. Hazel's wobbled, tilting left and right, while Brindle's trailed behind, turning circles. But the current shifted, and suddenly Hazel's boat shot forward with a gust of wind, bumping Pip's to the side. "Hazel's in the lead!" Pip cried. Hazel giggled, pressing her paws together. "Go, go, go." But then a ripple rocked her boat, tipping it dangerously. Pip's regained its path, and Brindle's, still turning circles, bumped into Hazel's, giving it just enough push to stay afloat. "See that?" Brindle chuckled. "Teamwork." The boats drifted around a bend where the water narrowed and sped up. All 3 friends ran along the bank, laughing, calling to their boats as though they could hear. The sun dappled through the leaves, painting the ground in light and shadow, and the air grew warm and sweet. At last, the boats reached a wide patch where the current slowed again. Pip's crossed first, Hazel's second, and Brindle's last, though still upright, which made him grin. "I won!" Pip shouted, leaping up and down. "But mine didn't sink," Hazel said proudly. "And mine still floats," Brindle added, picking his boat up carefully. They all laughed, falling back into the grass. Above them the sky stretched bright and clear, a soft breeze stirring the tall reeds by the river. Hazel sighed happily. "This was a good idea, Pip." "Of course it was," Pip said, though his voice was playful. "And next time we'll make them bigger." "Stronger? Maybe even paint them." Brindle gave a thoughtful hum. "I might carve a little wooden one." Something to last. Hazel's eyes shone. "Then we'll have a whole fleet." The river whispered beside them, carrying leaves and sunlight downstream, as if it too liked the sound of their plan. And so, on that golden morning, the three friends decided there would be many more races to come. The three of them lay in the grass for a long while after the race, the boats drifting out of sight down the gentle bend of the river. The warmth of the sun made Hazel's ears droop sleepily, while Pip twitched, his tail in little bursts, still too full of energy to lie still for long. Brindle, however, leaned back against his basket of stones, content to watch the clouds as they slid across the sky. "Do you hear that?" Hazel asked after a moment. Her ears perked toward the woods behind them. Brindle tilted his head. "Hear what?" "The sound of bees." She pointed toward the slope that led up from the riverbank. Sure enough, the low hum of bees floated on the air, steady and calm, mingling with the rustle of the leaves. Pip sat up, his eyes bright. "That means flowers." "And flowers mean honey," Brindle chuckled. "Not everything has to be about eating, Pip." Pip grinned sheepishly, but his whiskers twitched. "Still, it does sound good." Hazel brushed grass from her fur and stood. "Let's go see. Maybe we can find wildflowers to pick." They left the river behind, their paws soft on the mossy path, the air growing cooler in the shade of the trees. Birds flitted above them, sparrows and finches weaving through the branches, while the humming of the bees grew louder. Soon they came to a clearing dotted with clover and wild daisies, and in the middle of it all stood a tall patch of foxgloves swaying gently in the breeze. Bees buzzed lazily from flower to flower, their tiny legs dusted with yellow. Hazel sighed with delight. "Oh, it's beautiful." Pip darted straight for the flowers, sniffing eagerly. "Do you think the bees will mind if we sit here for a while?" "Not if we don't bother them," Brindle said. He lowered himself onto the grass, the earth cool beneath his fur. The three friends spent some time there, weaving little chains from clover stems and tucking daisies behind their ears. Pip tried to balance a whole crown of them on his head, but it slipped sideways, making Hazel laugh until her belly hurt. "Maybe you should stick to boats," she giggled. "Or crowns for squirrels only," Pip replied, trying to look serious, though his whiskers twitched. The air was full of summer smells, warm grass, sweet flowers, the faint spice of pine drifting down from the woods. A soft wind moved through the clearing, carrying with it the promise of something Hazel always loved, the thought of a shared meal, enjoyed outside. Her stomach gave a small growl, and she pressed a paw against it, embarrassed. "Do you think it's too early for lunch?" "Never," Brindle said simply, standing and brushing leaves from his fur. "Come, I brought something." They followed him back to the shade of the trees, where he set down his basket of stones and pulled out a smaller bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were neat slices of cheese, a loaf of crusty bread, and a jar of dark berry jam. "Oh," Hazel's eyes widened. "That looks wonderful." Brindle smiled shyly. "I thought we might get hungry after our game." They sat together, passing the loaf between them, spreading jam thick on the slices and layering cheese on top. The tang of the cheese mixed with the sweetness of the jam, and Hazel hummed with pleasure after her first bite. Pip licked jam from his paws, his tail flicking happily, while Brindle chewed slowly, savouring the simple meal. For a time they ate in companionable silence, the sounds of the woods wrapping around them like a soft blanket. The breeze carried the smell of clover, the bees hummed steadily, and somewhere in the distance a woodpecker tapped at a tree. When they had finished, Pip leaned back against the roots of an oak, his paws resting on his belly. "That was the best boat race I've ever had," he said with a grin, "and the best lunch too." Hazel tilted her head, thoughtful. "We could have more races, but maybe not today." "I don't want the river to be the only place we play," Brindle nodded. "Agreed." There's more to the woods than water. Pip's eyes lit up suddenly. What about chestnuts? I saw some fallen ones near the old mill last week. Hazel clapped her paws together. Oh, chestnut gathering? We could roast them later. Brindle's whiskers twitched. That sounds worth the walk. And just like that, the boats were forgotten, their little adventure flowing into a new plan, as natural as the river carrying leaves downstream. They cleaned up their things, brushed crumbs from their fur, and set off down the woodland path, the sun still high, the air warm and bright. The bees hummed behind them, the river whispered out of sight, and ahead lay the promise of chestnuts, laughter, and whatever other small joys the woods might bring. The path toward the old mill curved gently through the woods, leading the three friends beneath tall oaks whose leaves rustled in the mild wind. The air smelled faintly of earth and moss, with sunbeams flickering through the branches, painting shifting golden patches on the ground. Every so often Pip darted ahead, nose twitching as though he could already smell the chestnuts waiting for them. Hazel lagged behind, her paws brushing against low ferns that lined the path. She paused now and then to look at the way sunlight glittered on spiderwebs stretched between branches, or to listen to the chattering of squirrels leaping from tree to tree above them. Brindle walked at an even pace in the middle, his basket swinging gently from one paw. He glanced back at Hazel, then forward to Pip. "We'll get there soon," he said, his deep voice calm. "Don't tire yourself out before the gathering begins." Pip stopped mid-bound, ears flicking. "Me? Never. I've got energy for 10 chestnut hunts." He spun around once just to prove it, then trotted back to Hazel. "Besides, if I don't hurry, someone else might take all the good ones." Hazel laughed softly. "There'll be plenty." Chestnuts always fall more than anyone can carry. The path grew wider as they approached the clearing around the mill. The mill itself was old and leaning, its wheel no longer turning in the stream that once fed it. Moss grew thick on the roof, and ivy wound its way up the sides. Birds perched along the broken beams, fluttering away as the friends came closer. But beneath the towering chestnut trees that stood around the mill, the ground was littered with glossy brown nuts, some still tucked inside their prickly green shells, others lying loose, shining in the sunlight. Pip let out a squeak of joy and dashed forward. "Look at them all!" Hazel giggled and hurried after him, crouching low to pick up the nearest nut. The shell was cool and smooth in her paws, and she could already imagine the warm smell of them roasting later. Brindle set down his basket and pulled another from inside it, handing one to each of them. "Fill these, and watch your paws with the prickly shells they scattered across the clearing, the sound of rustling leaves and Pip's constant chatter filling the air." "Here's a big one," Pip shouted, holding up a fat nut still in its half-open shell. "This could feed us all winter." Hazel rolled her eyes but smiled. "One chestnut won't feed anyone for long, Pip." "But it will make a nice snack." Brindle chuckled from where he worked steadily, dropping nuts into his basket with a soft clink. "A snack if Pip doesn't eat it before we get home." The afternoon slipped by in this way, with the three friends laughing, teasing, and filling their baskets. The sun climbed slowly across the sky, its light turning more golden, making the clearing glow. Bees drifted lazily among the ivy flowers on the mill wall, and a breeze stirred the tall grass, carrying the dry rustle of autumn. At last, Pip flopped onto the grass, his basket half full. "I think I've done enough gathering for today." He stretched out, paws behind his head, gazing up at the swaying branches above. Hazel, who had nearly filled hers, shook her head. "You always stop first." "But I'm clever," Pip said with a grin. "I know it's best to save energy for carrying these home." Brindle, whose basket was also nearly full, sat down beside them. "He may be clever, but I think he just wants someone else to carry his." Hazel giggled, while Pip pretended to look shocked. "I would never." They rested in the clearing, their baskets gathered beside them, and the woods seemed to grow quieter as the day softened into late afternoon. The sun angled lower, and the long shadows of the chestnut trees stretched across the ground. After a while, Hazel sat up and brushed bits of grass from her fur. "Shall we head back?" "We could roast a few tonight." Pip's ears perked. "With butter?" "And salt," Brindle added. His whiskers twitched at the thought. They stood and gathered their baskets, their paws steady on the path as they began the walk home. The air had cooled, carrying the faint smell of damp leaves and wood smoke, drifting from somewhere deep in the forest. Birds sang their evening songs, high and sweet, before settling in their nests. As they walked, Pip's voice rose again with new energy. "Do you think we could invite the others? Roasting chestnuts is always better with more friends." Hazel nodded eagerly. "We could. Perhaps down by the river bank? If the wind isn't too cold," Brindle gave a thoughtful hum. "Or in my den. The fire will keep us warm." The thought of it, firelight flickering on the walls, the sound of chestnuts sizzling and popping, the smell of butter, filled them with a quiet, happy anticipation. And so, with baskets full and the woods humming softly around them, they walked back together, the small adventure of gathering done, but the promise of another cosy evening just beginning. The walk back to Brindle's den was a pleasant one, the path winding gently between tall beeches whose golden leaves drifted down like slow-falling sparks. The sun had begun to slip lower, painting the woods in warm shades of orange and amber, and the air had that faint crispness that hinted at the coming evening. Their baskets bumped against their paws as they walked, filled to the brim with glossy chestnuts that rattled softly with each step. Brindle's den was set into the side of a hill, the doorway framed with woven branches and a little wooden sign Pip had carved for him the summer before. The sign read, "Welcome, friends," and though the letters were uneven, Brindle had never wanted to change it. Above the door, a small lantern already glowed, its light flickering softly in the growing dusk. Hazel's nose twitched as soon as they stepped inside. Brindle's den always smelled of warm earth, pine needles and dried herbs. Shelves carved into the earthen walls held neat rows of jars filled with roots, spices and dried flowers, while a small fire crackled in the stone hearth. "This is perfect," Hazel said, her eyes shining as she set her basket down near the table. Brindle gave a small, pleased nod. "Let's get the fire hotter. Chestnuts roast best on good heat." Pip immediately sprang into action, dropping his basket on the floor and darting over to the hearth. "I'll fetch more wood," he announced, bounding back outside before either of them could reply. Hazel laughed and shook her head. "He always acts like he's the only one who can help." Brindle pulled a small iron pan from the shelf, one with holes punched into the bottom, and set it near the fire. "At least he has enthusiasm." Moments later, Pip returned, dragging 2 thick sticks of wood nearly as tall as himself. He dropped them with a dramatic thud, puffing out his chest. "There. That should last all night," Hazel rolled her eyes fondly. "Or at least until the chestnuts are gone." They worked together, Brindle stoking the fire until it glowed bright and steady, Pip cracking open the prickly shells with a flat stone, and Hazel rinsing the nuts in a bowl of cool water before drying them with a cloth. The rhythm of their movements filled the den with a comfortable, homely energy, the kind that made even the smallest chores feel pleasant. When at last the pan was full, Brindle set it over the fire. The chestnuts hissed softly, then began to pop and crackle as their shells split open. A rich, nutty smell filled the den, warm and inviting, wrapping around them like a blanket. "Oh, that's the best smell in the world," Pip sighed, flopping onto a cushion by the fire. Hazel joined him, pulling her knees up to her chest. "It really is. It feels like autumn has finally arrived." Brindle stirred the pan gently, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Autumn has a way of bringing everyone together. Food, warmth and stories. Stories. Pip perked up immediately. "Yes, let's tell stories while we wait," Hazel smiled. "What kind of story?" Pip thought for a moment, his whiskers twitching. "Something funny. Not one of Brindle's long, serious ones." Brindle let out a low chuckle. "Very well. You start," then so Pip launched into a tale of the time he tried to climb the tallest oak in the meadow to see if he could spot the river bend from its top. He described how bravely he scurried up, how the branches grew thinner and thinner, and how, when he finally looked down, he squeaked so loudly that a squirrel dropped the acorn it was carrying. Hazel laughed until her sides hurt, and even Brindle's deep voice rumbled with amusement. When the chestnuts were ready, Brindle poured them onto a cloth, the steam rising in small curls. Their shells were cracked open, revealing the soft, golden insides. They passed them around, peeling them carefully and blowing on them before popping them into their mouths. The taste was rich and warm, a little sweet, a little earthy, and utterly satisfying. Pip licked his paws. "I could eat 100 of these." Hazel shook her head with a smile. "You'd be sick long before that." Brindle leaned back against his chair, watching them fondly. "It's good to share them, though. Chestnuts always taste better with company." The fire burned steady, shadows flickering on the walls while the wind outside picked up slightly, brushing against the entrance with a soft sigh. The sound made Hazel feel safe and snug, knowing they were warm inside with plenty to eat and good friends beside her. For a long while they sat there, roasting and eating, telling little stories and laughing softly as the night settled gently over the woods. When at last the baskets were empty and the fire had burned down to glowing embers, Hazel yawned and stretched. That was a perfect evening. "It was," Brindle agreed, "but tomorrow we'll bring another." Pip's eyes sparkled. "What shall we do tomorrow?" Hazel tilted her head thoughtfully. "We'll see. The woods always have something waiting." Brindle's whiskers twitched with quiet amusement. "Then tomorrow we'll find it." Outside, the moon rose slowly above the trees, and the woods whispered softly in the night, holding the promise of the small adventures yet to come. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with a pale blue sky stretched high above the trees. Hazel was the first to wake, stirring in her little burrow not far from Brindle's hill. She blinked at the slanted sunlight that crept through the round window, catching on the dust motes and making them glow like tiny stars. Stretching, she slipped from beneath her blanket and padded softly to the door. The woods outside were alive with the sounds of day beginning. Birds calling to one another in bright, cheery voices, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the faint rush of water from the river beyond the meadow. Hazel's ears twitched happily. After the warmth of last night's fire and roasted chestnuts, the cool, fresh air felt like a perfect balance. Not long after, Pip appeared, bounding up the path to her burrow with his usual energy. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth and grinned from ear to ear. "Morning, Hazel," he chirped. "I brought breakfast." Hazel's nose twitched. "What's in there?" Pip unwrapped the cloth with a flourish to reveal 2 small round rolls of bread, still warm, and a wedge of soft cheese. "The baker gave them to me when I passed by his cart." "Said I looked hungry." Hazel laughed softly. "He always says that to you." "Because I always am," Pip replied without shame, already nibbling at the edge of his roll. The two of them shared the bread and cheese on Hazel's doorstep, the sun warming their fur as they ate. When they were finished, Pip licked his paws and leaned back against the doorframe. "What do you suppose Brindle is doing this morning?" "Probably tending his herbs," Hazel guessed. "He always likes to check them early in the day." "Let's go see." Pip leapt up before Hazel could answer, bounding down the path toward the hill. Hazel followed more slowly, smiling to herself. Sure enough, when they reached Brindle's den, they found him outside, crouched over a row of small clay pots lined neatly along the slope. He was examining the leaves of a thyme plant, his large paws surprisingly gentle as he plucked away a few dry sprigs. "Good morning," Brindle rumbled, straightening when he noticed them. "Good morning," Hazel replied warmly. Pip gave a wave, already sniffing at the herbs with keen interest. Brindle's whiskers twitched in amusement. "Have you eaten?" "Yes," Hazel said. "Thanks to Pip's charm at the bakery." Brindle chuckled softly. "Then you'll have strength for the day." "What shall we do with it?" Pip's eyes lit up. "Something fun. Something new." Hazel thought for a moment, looking at the woods beyond. The leaves had grown brighter, the air cooler, and she felt the shift of the season in her fur. "What if we visit the meadow? The wind will be strong there today. We could make kites." "Kites!" Pip clapped his paws together. "Yes! Oh, that would be marvellous." Brindle gave a thoughtful nod. "I've not flown a kite since I was a pup. But it is a good idea." And just like that, their plan was made. The 3 of them set off toward the meadow, carrying only what they thought they might need. Hazel brought some string she had saved from bundling herbs. Pip carried a handful of bright scraps of cloth, and Brindle, practical as always, brought a roll of thin sticks he had kept from pruning his trees. The meadow spread out wide and golden beneath the bright morning sun. The tall grasses rippled in waves, bending with the breeze, and the air smelled of clover and the faint tang of wild mint. Butterflies danced over the flowers, and in the distance a lark soared high, its song tumbling down like silver rain. "This is perfect," Hazel said, her eyes wide as she looked across the field. "Let's get started," Pip said eagerly, dropping his bundle and pawing through the cloth. They set to work beneath the shade of a tall oak at the meadow's edge. Brindle cut and tied the sticks with careful precision, forming sturdy frames. Hazel measured and knotted the string, humming softly as she worked. Pip busied himself with the cloth, though his knots came out crooked and his pieces uneven. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he declared when Hazel gently teased him. "It just has to fly." The morning passed in cheerful busyness, the three friends laughing and chattering as they built their kites. At last, with the sun climbing high overhead, they stood back to admire their creations. Hazel's kite was a neat diamond shape, its cloth pale yellow and decorated with pressed leaves. Brindle's was larger, built strong and steady, its deep blue cloth stitched with careful lines. Pip's was lopsided, with uneven tails, but it gleamed with every colour of cloth he had found, making it bright as a rainbow. "They're wonderful," Hazel said, her whiskers twitching with delight. "One way to find out," Pip said, already running toward the open field with his string trailing behind him. The kites lifted into the air one by one, catching the steady wind. Pip's, though wobbly, danced wildly and spun in circles, making him laugh until he fell into the grass. Hazel's soared gracefully, dipping and gliding with the breeze. Brindle's climbed higher and higher, steady as a bird until it seemed it might touch the clouds. Hazel felt her heart swell as she held the string tight in her paws, the pull of the wind alive and strong. Beside her, Pip was shouting directions at his kite as though it could hear, while Brindle watched his with quiet pride. As they sat together in the grass, catching their breath, Pip flopped onto his back with a satisfied sigh. "That was the best idea, Hazel," Hazel smiled softly, the wind brushing her fur. "The meadow always gives us something wonderful." Brindle nodded in agreement. "And tomorrow, perhaps, it will give us something else." The next morning dawned with a quiet mist rolling through the forest, curling low between the roots of trees and hanging like a veil over the meadow. Hazel padded out of her burrow, blinking at the soft white fog that blurred the world around her. Drops of dew clung to the grass, sparkling faintly in the pale light. She shivered a little, then drew her shawl closer around her shoulders. The kites from the day before were neatly folded and stacked near her doorway. She touched them fondly, smiling at the memory of the laughter they'd shared. Pip appeared not long after, bounding along the path with his fur damp from the fog. He looked like he'd run straight through the mist without care as usual. "Hazel! There you are," he called, his voice muffled slightly by the heavy air. Hazel raised a paw in greeting. "Good morning, Pip." Pip skidded to a stop before her, catching his breath. "I've just been to the river." "You can't see the other side at all. It's like the water disappears into the clouds." His eyes sparkled with excitement. "Brindle says it'll all burn off once the sun's higher, but for now, it's like magic." Hazel smiled at his wonder. "Did Brindle say what he's doing today?" Pip nodded. "He said he's going to check on Old Fern's roof. She had a leak last week when it rained." Hazel's whiskers twitched with concern. Old Fern was a hedgehog who lived at the edge of the woods. Her little burrow home was cosy and filled with the smell of dried herbs. But Hazel remembered how worried she had looked when the last storm had passed through. "Should we go and help him?" Hazel suggested. "Yes, that's exactly why I came," Pip said eagerly. "I thought we could bring something too. If they're fixing a roof, they'll need food after." Hazel's mind turned at once to her pantry. "I have a bit of honey cake left, and some jars of plum jam." Pip's ears perked up. "Perfect. I'll bring a basket. Let's go." Within the hour, the two of them were on the path toward Old Fern's home, a small woven basket swinging between them. When they reached Old Fern's clearing, they found Brindle already there, standing on a wooden stool beside the hedgehog's roof. His sturdy paws worked with surprising delicacy as he adjusted the thatching. Old Fern herself stood below, wringing her paws with worry but smiling when she saw Hazel and Pip arrive. "Oh, how kind of you to come," she said warmly. "And with a basket too." "We thought you might all need something sweet after working," Hazel explained, setting the basket on a stump. Pip craned his neck to look up at Brindle. "How's it going?" Brindle's deep voice floated down through the mist. "The roof is sound, but some of the straw has grown thin. It won't hold through another storm unless we patch it." "Do you need help?" Hazel asked. Brindle gave a small nod. Pip's chest puffed with pride at the responsibility. He hurried to grab the straw, his small paws working quickly as Brindle placed and secured each bundle. Hazel helped Old Fern gather the loose ends and sweep away the damp leaves that clung to the roof's edge. At last, Brindle climbed down from the stool, brushing straw from his fur. "It will hold now," he said with quiet satisfaction. "You should be safe, Fern." Old Fern's eyes glistened as she clasped her paws together. "I don't know what I would have done without you all." "Thank you." Truly, Hazel opened the basket. "Then it's time for cake and jam." They sat together around the low stump, sharing the honey cake and spreading jam, thick across slices of bread Old Fern had warmed on her hearth. The cheese was passed around in small wedges. Pip, of course, ended up with a smudge of jam on his nose, making everyone laugh. This was what made the woods feel like home, the way everyone came together, each small kindness weaving into something stronger. Hazel smiled, already thinking of a dozen small adventures waiting to be discovered. The end. Thank you for joining us on our new adventure. If you enjoyed this story, check out our channel for more magical forest tales and cozy adventures waiting just for you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back soon for the next story. Bye-bye.